Great. Looks like we're live. Thanks everyone for joining. Today is June 26th. This is the OpenJS Foundation Cross-Project Council meeting. Thanks everyone for joining, and anyone who's watching live, thank you as well. Do we start off with any announcements or anything that people want to share before we get into the agenda? No?
None here.
I was thinking of you, Jory, so thanks for chiming in.
I've always got something to say, but not this time.
All right, great. Cool, so let's jump into the agenda. I don't know, like I said, everybody who's on the call, please drop your name into Google Docs. You know, so everybody can chip in on taking notes, that'd be great. Miles, did you have a preference for which of these two issues we want to start with, 229 pull request or issue 234? Both of them are in the chat.
Maybe start with 234, then do 229 next, because I think 234 may be quick if we have consensus around it. And since we have quorum, I think it's good.
Yep. All right, great. So issue number 234, who can be an observer? I'll read Miles' opening comment here. As Michael Dawson points out in 232, who can be an observer is not explicit about requirements. I'd always been under the impression that there was a requirement that observers be active in a foundation project. It's not documented. Some folks are chiming in here saying that they'd rather it be fully open and only add restrictions as we feel needed. And then Wes Todd brought up a good comment about observers and potentially even carving out a few moments at the end if any observers have any comments, which I think is a good idea. So if you can help me remember to ask that before we close the meeting, that would be great. But does anyone have any comments on this or concerns, objections?
Yeah, so I mean, it's not comments or concerns, but just when, at least my memory, and I could have, you know, understood it wrong, but when we first set up the concept of an observer and we were drafting it, I believe that the intention was that observers were limited to participants in OpenJS projects, not generally open. And that's not to say that I don't necessarily have a problem with making it broader, but I don't know if anyone else on this call was part of those original conversations. I think Tracy was, and Jory, and I don't see Mateo, but I guess it was just like part of it for me was very much making sure that people who are coming and getting involved were, you know, representing someone. We're a cross-project council, and so wanted it to be that, you know, anyone from any of the projects can come in, but the original intention wasn't anyone can come in anytime. I'm not saying, again, that I'm opposed to that, but I just think we need to clarify it.
I have one question. So an observer is not someone who just watches the live stream, but someone who actually dials into this call and can speak and chat, right?
Yeah, by our governance right now in the charter, observers are able to fully participate in the consensus seeking process, including blocking anything. And so one thing that we'll have to do that we haven't done yet is kind of go through our charter and tease out the bits that need to be like better defined through governance. And we want to minimize how much of it is in the charter itself, because the charter requires board approval to change, whereas the governance doc we can change at whim. So a good example is like the definition of an observer is in the charter, but the process for who can be an observer can be defined in the governance. So there isn't a huge difference between observers and regular members, aside from the fact that regular members have their name on a list, from like an actual ability to participate in the meeting.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna, I'm kind of wondering, just like as we're delineating all of these roles, like.
Well, the other difference is that they are committing to actually participate at a certain level.
Observer or regular member?
Regular members, because there's actually, like, you know, there's actually things in the charter that says if you don't meet this participation level, you'll be removed as a regular member.
And the observer is someone who is not committed to regular commitment to the projects or the foundation, but still get to be able to block things?
It's basically we've said that they can show up and participate in the consensus seeking. And if they show up for one meeting and then never come back again, that's fine. Or they could come to multiple meetings or.
But I think, so in my, this is my naive, I think, thought here. How's that different than anybody being able to pop? Because we want anybody to be able to pop in and do that, right? Like that's including their opinions and making sure that we're making it an open process.
And that's what I thought observers were.
But why do we need to formalize it as a like literal observer title versus you are showing up and contributing?
Right. I mean, I think for me, it was the way to say that they're basically you are invited as an observer, right? And anybody can show up and come to a meeting, can participate. We've just happened to call the people who do that observers.
Just to interrupt really quickly, Timo, and I apologize if I didn't say your name correctly, has their hand up for comment.
Yeah, so I am what I believe to be an observer in this meeting. So I'm from the QUnit project. So my question is actually, so I understand the distinction that the charter makes between observers and regular members in terms of who they are. It's not really clear to me what the difference is between what they can do. The charter mentions that the regular members can take on roles and responsibilities, but I'm not entirely sure what those are. So like, what can a regular member do that an observer can't? Maybe that's a way to sort of move forward.
That is a good question. Now, I think in terms of like being able to land issues in the repo, I would expect that, regular members could do that. I'm not sure that observers could do that. Like members, the way it's written, members have a responsibility along with the voting members for the work of the CPC, whereas observers are invited to participate in the issues and in the meetings, but don't necessarily, they're not necessarily part of the CPC itself.
If I remember from the discussions around the formation, wasn't the difference that regular members are making a commitment to be available when obligations are given to them, whereas observers are potentially transient? Maybe they come in for a meeting or two, or come in as they need. But for example, the CPC wouldn't delegate necessarily to them. Am I remembering that correctly? Somebody else who was in those meetings might also have more clarity. That was how I understood it.
I think that's certainly part of it, but I think that for example, I can't remember, Miles, in terms of like observers versus members in the modules working group, were the members able to land things and observers still able to land things? I'm just looking for.
Yeah, so I'll answer that, and then Wes Todd has their hand up as well to add something. In modules, the way that we had it was that we had we had voting members and we had observing members, and essentially everyone was able. There was only the two classes, and the only difference was who was counted towards quorum. That was it.
Okay.
So the observing, and I'd have to double check the exact names that we did, but essentially the two classes were the difference between, it's active members and observers, and the only difference was the expectation that active members attend the meetings and that they were counted towards quorum. Because the problem we were running into was that we had like 50 plus people sign up for the group, and our governance was drafted in such a way that we needed quorum to make decisions, and we never had quorum in meetings. So we split it into these two classes where it's like, you needed to be on that list to attend the meetings. It was very easy to get on the list. You just had to open a PR or open an issue. But that, any of those people could attend the meetings. But when we actually did a count for quorum within the meeting, it only came from that group of voting members. And Wes, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm also here as an observer, and I think it's actually pretty important. So from my experience coming into projects, sometimes it is really nice to give people an easy way to be involved without feeling like they're stepping in too far. So my example here is I work on the Express project. When I first started, we had some technical committee meetings, but there was no role for an observer. And so I actually didn't join on the calls. Even though I was active in the repo, I felt like that was because there was no explicit, declaration of here's an observer role, you can join the call, participate, and then maybe delineating what you can't do. But we didn't have any of that. And so I actually just didn't join the calls. And I think that was a really big barrier. And I think that, this call, I'm here, I'm talking, I feel pretty good about my place in it. And I think that's because of the explicit call out of an observer role. So I think having it is important. I also do think that I would feel weird if an observer was able to block an issue in a consensus seeking model. So maybe that's also a good line to say, if you're going to be a drop by, you can't block issues.
Yeah, I appreciate that perspective. Jory, you had your hand up?
Yeah, actually, Wes really kind of teased what I was going to say up quite well, because in this particular case, I think Jory Dan is a great example. Dan is here with me as an observer, and he's somebody who's very active and important to our ecosystem, but certainly not somebody who necessarily wants to be in on these meetings all the time or block consensus on project specific matters or foundation specific matters. But it's helpful that he has and he knows that he has a place at the table to listen and hear, and nobody's going to be questioning why he's there and under what auspices. And for me, another important function these particular roles play is giving people that sense of I think Wes kind of called it like a sense of place, where maybe a regular member can feel through their contributions in the CPC validated, like they're part of a team, part of like the people creating solutions for project problems, but they're not voting members, and observers have that access to getting this information with no kind of questions or qualms being raised. I think is really important.
So one concern that I have in general, and I don't have a solution yet, so I apologize for that, is just if we create too many hierarchies and too many different roles, and I say this as the person who literally opened the pull request to create an extra role, so I'm guilty. But I'm worried that it makes it harder for people to get involved, and that like I'm trying to reconcile, like I think it's really good to have this list of people who are like opting in as the regular member class to like having like taking extra commitment and committing to doing things. I think that's really great. But at the same time, now when we have like voting members and regular members and observers, and now we're talking about guests, it just feels like a lot to put on people to kind of get up to speed to realize that everyone's mostly the same and there's just distributed responsibility. Would we almost even be better off? So Michael, for example, you were saying, who maintains the repo? Well, like, does that even need to be like a membership class thing? Could we just have a thing that's like maintainers, and you can add yourself to the maintainers list if you've been to N number of meetings? I don't know exactly what we want to do it, but maybe if we're talking what's important, if what we're talking about that's important here are specific responsibilities and things that need to be done, whether it be a scribe or whether it be a maintainer of the repo or whether it be, I mean, we have a chair position already, but would we be better off by having people sign up for very, very specific tasks rather than like a general membership class?
I'm not sure. I think I don't think we should add a guest class. I mean, that's what started this discussion. So I don't think more than the voting regular and observers make sense to me, at least my current understanding. But I still believe that the ones that we have, those three are important to have, that those three as different ones. I'm not sure. I mean, in terms, one of the comments was, well, maybe observers shouldn't be able to block. So we could have more discussion in terms of what you should be able to do in each of those roles. And maybe if we do that, it'll be clearer in the end as to the distinctions and why it makes sense to have them or not.
So I guess maybe one of the questions, and then perhaps we should take this offline, and like I wear my heart on my sleeve with this. I am still not 100% convinced that regular members as a class, the benefit outweighs the complication of adding the extra class. And I think that what we're feeling right now is a bit of the complication of having like a multi-tiered hierarchy instead of just kind of like two specific roles.
Well, I kind of, obviously I disagree
Mm-hmm.
With that position, and I agree that we don't want a fourth, so that's why like we don't need a separate guest, in my opinion anyway, because observers, as we've covered it, talk about it. But I do think that this case is a bit different from other ones in that we have a limited number of voting members versus in other areas within the projects, we can add as many people as we need to the voting member level. And because we can't do that in this case, I think that's why in my mind, the regular members, being part of the overall ownership of the work makes sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
We have some hands up again, Jory Dan.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is for Dan now.
Yeah, I just want to say narrowly, as someone who's, I guess, being an observer right now, that don't feel like I need to have the ability to block things. I want to, listen and see how I can contribute. But given that I'm not a regular member, I don't feel like I need that sort of.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dan. And that's kind of how I'm feeling as well. And I'll let Timo go in a second. I just want to say that I think, having voting members and regular members makes sense. And we should clarify this third group of people because we want this to be open. And we want people involved in the process, but maybe blocking things is just slightly out of scope.
Maybe a clarification to the observer class then, and maybe we can kick that off offline to come up with some copy.
Mm-hmm. I think that sounds good. Timo, do you want to add something?
So I'm sort of torn between both having regular members and not having regular members. I think as a current observer from the CUNY project, I think there's a certain empowerment from having the idea of regular members. Like I'm currently thinking of whether I should be a regular member or not. I think I qualify, but I haven't really figured out yet what it would mean. But I think being listed somewhere does have a certain empowerment of like being stimulated to contribute more actively, even though I have presumably the ability to remove myself at any time. But like it has a certain empowerment on the one hand. On the other hand, I am still a little bit confused as I have heard the term blocking now a few times. I'm assuming that doesn't mean voting. So maybe someone could elaborate a little bit or point me to elsewhere what it means to be blocking.
I guess I'll give the very quick answer to that is consensus seeking is basically we work to try and get everybody in agreement with the way forward. And blocking means that, you object and can't be convinced to not object. And those are the cases that require a vote of the voting members. If nobody objects, like you don't necessarily have to agree, but if nobody actually objects, then things can move forward.
I see. So if there is at least one objection, then there will actually be a vote.
That's right. Now we work
that makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, we work hard to address any objections first, but if we get to the point where we just can't address an objection, then that's when a vote takes place.
I see. I was under the impression that everything is a vote, but that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, no, I think in that case, I would also agree that reserving that to regular members would probably make a lot of sense.
One thing to keep in mind also, this is at least my own philosophy, others may disagree, but I often view in these consensus organizations, getting to the point where we need to vote is a failure state. There are some cases where we legally need to vote on things or we have it in the charter. So like new projects joining, for example, require a 2/3 supermajority vote. But like in general, the hope would be that that vote is unanimous. We don't want to generally be bringing in things that are controversial. But the way we've managed to do things so far through the entire bootstrap process and until now in these meetings has been through strict consensus and not requiring a single vote. And that is part of why, at least to me, it's important that observers are empowered to participate, because if you're not able to participate in the consensus seeking process, it gets really odd to how you even like participate in the discussion, because what we're doing right now is consensus seeking. Now, I do think that the guidance that Mike suggested up here, which was adding the observers are encouraged to participate and volunteer, but should refrain from disrupting or blocking progress, I think is like a decent amount of language that makes it clear that they still can object to something. So if there is a really strong opinion, they can, but it's not, you know, what we encourage people to do.
But I would just as a note with consensus in general, though, like you don't have it. It's more about you don't disagree enough that you would want to object, right? Like
Right.
you don't need 100% consensus on things at all time in order to be able to move forward as a group. You want to make sure people feel like they can dissent and have that discussion.
So perhaps I can offer a little bit of perspective of something we do at the Wikimedia Foundation, which sounds quite similar to what we're describing here in the what we call the architecture process. We also have a lot of observers, and they do participate in the consensus seeking process, and they can object to things, and we'll have a short talk about it in the meetings as we do today. But ultimately, like we're not required to convince them in the way that we've described here. So like they can object to things, and you know, for this, like the way we've described, like you have voting, and below that is a sort of consensus, and below that there's essentially another layer of like sort of general chattering among observers. So yeah, that again, that they're not be blocking and things like that.
Yeah, it sounds similar. Nick O'Leary has his hand up. Nick, you there? Can't hear you. Oh, Nick's hand is down. Maybe he is having some audio trouble. Audio, yep. All right, well, if you get that sorted out, let us know.
Okay. You can also feel free to type your answer, and one of us can read it out.
Yeah.
Like is my audio back now?
Yep.
Yes.
There we go. It's just a very quick point following on from the last one, really, that an observer can join the conversation and join that sort of consensus-seeking discussion. And I think the point was just made that we wouldn't be obliged to fully resolve their concerns, but equally they just have to convince one regular or voting member that they have a valid concern, and then then it can become a something that can be taken forward. I think having that delineation that the observer can come with a concern, it can be heard, it can be discussed, then it's over to the voting and regular members as to whether it is something to pursue further or to move forward without resolving.
Yeah, and I think that I like Mike Dolan's language in the chat here, but I think maybe it could be expanded slightly to say that they can raise concerns, observers can raise concerns as well. We shouldn't discourage that, but yeah. All right, great. So should we move forward with some sort of clarification of language as a PR, and we can take the discussion to that PR and hopefully get consensus there without, since we've had a good conversation here.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and change that up. I'll close the pull request, adding the guests.
Okay, great. Thank you, Miles. All right, great. So let's quickly move on to, is it pull 229? Let me pull this up. So this is move new projects to stage 2. Miles, I think you're still on if you want to chime in before you have to drop. And then George.
I've got to drop right this minute. Apologies.
Okay.
George's
good.
Thanks, Miles.
Thank you. Thank you, Miles. Bye.
So Miles and I got together to do some work on the process through which new projects are going to be, brought into the organization and onboarded. And we tried to take a pass at just first off some cleanup that referenced older ideas and language from our way back in our bootstrap days, and then secondarily to address the some of the concerns that were raised on the original that were unanswered questions on the original pull requests on the original proposal. So anyway, so you can take a look at the diff, and I see we just did this work on Monday, and we've already got quite a few comments and that sort of thing. One of the key things we did was try and provide some more guidance in terms of what we're looking for in some of these spaces. So for example, in the description and those areas saying, hey, keep it to around a certain word count, like don't go writing a 3-page essay for us, that kind of thing. We tried to decrease the number of, we had a thoughtful conversation around like whether questions we were asking were really necessary. And so we wanted to, because we certainly saw feedback on Twitter and other places that, gosh, this is a lot of questions and it's not necessarily going to be applicable to all projects. So can we somehow shorten that list of questions we're asking, or make it more interactive in terms of like, if we discover there's something we probably ought to know in the application process, go from there. Another kind of additional construct that we seem to have had a verbal agreement about was sort of the process to get started, which is really, really important for us to agree on as soon as we can, because we do have new projects in the pipeline who are interested, I think, and being able to be very clear with them about what they should be expecting. We are proposing is that there is an initial email from a new project that states their intent to join, that goes to the voting CPC group to raise any questions or concerns through like a silent period. And once that silent period has exited, which will occur after any unresolved questions are answered, then the project would go into an incubation period, which is where they're going through that onboarding checklist, which we have in the PR. And so the idea is to consider them part of the OpenJS family in an incubating capacity as they complete the items on the checklist, because there are quite a few items, and I'm sure we'll think of others as we go. And then once they're out of that incubating period, because all of the items are checked, they're fully in whatever stage they've elected, be that at large or impact or whatever. And so that's sort of some of the finesse that we've put on this. We did kind of have one refinement of unresolved question, which is all of our existing projects be expected to go through this checklist as a matter of onboarding, but we're keen to get your feedback on it. And I should also add that one of the reasons Miles raised that first PR that we were just discussing is because during our conversation about the incubation phase, we were keen to make sure that projects felt that they could be present for this for CPC meetings, for example, but not sure exactly what category they would fit. So thus the straw person PR that we just discussed. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for providing all that. As I think you mentioned, gentleman Toby left a few comments. I actually pinged him on Twitter to see if because he was active just a half hour ago, to see if he wanted to join the conversation. But some of his concerns are related to multi-repo projects. We're trying to move this to stage 2. So I don't know, what if comments like Toby's are blocking towards stage 2, or if that's something we can clarify in the next stage.
I'm reading Toby's comments of a few hours ago. It seems that they're more like what's the word I'm looking for? Like looking for more detail or more specificity. Can you clear? I'm not reading anything that necessarily seems like it is a blocking concern. We can certainly ask them, on on Twitter or something here shortly. He's
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's how I read it as well. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, and some of them are good, like a full audit of collaborators. I'm not sure that I would know what that is.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that one is online. Let me sing my song here. Everybody, let me sing to you while I look for that comment. We did talk about a full audit of dependencies, and that, like, the original language there was quite, quite onerous, and we decided that there's probably resources within the foundation or within the LF that can help projects collect that information more easily than just requiring them to give it to us. That we could do that together if we needed it. Why can't I find the one he's talking about?
It's line 36, 37.
36, 37 of the
And the PR, well, yeah, or even just if you open up the link, it's the first comment.
Okay, I've gone completely blind.
I'll put the text he's commenting on in the chat.
Okay. I just want to make sure that I understand what our intent was. Oh, hi. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah, I think we should clarify this, because one thing I know that we will want as part of our one of our requirements in the impact stage is that the projects are openly governed. And so for impact projects, it's important that no more than a certain percentage of, and I don't remember the numbers, of project collaborators are from a certain company. And so that's, I think, where the spirit of that need comes from. And so perhaps there's a easier way to get at that information, but I think that's what we're going for here.
Right, you can read so much into audit given the context that you think of a tax audit or something else and it's like, oh my God.
Yeah. So that's something to thank you guys. Yeah, that's something to fix or clarify.
But I didn't want to distract too much, but I think your comment that these are just, answering these questions, it shouldn't be something that we can't do fairly easily, and it may actually pull out a few things we want to refine.
Right. We don't want to put more obstacles in the way of a project coming to talk to us about a need that they have that the foundation could help them with, or joining the foundation, that kind of thing. And the other important kind of thing to capture here is that with the incubation stage, we want to make it clear that at any point, if the project decides or if the foundation decides that and we're discovering more about how we're onboarding, that it's not a fit, that we can part ways and no harm, no foul. It just that it just didn't work out. That integration didn't quite work out, and so that's something else we want to make sure is clear in the proposal.
Great. So do we think that's we should move this to stage 2 and then work out the details in stage 3?
We're definitely asking for stage 2 approval because we feel this is an urgency and would love, we want to make sure everybody's concerns are addressed and also balance that against probably not going to get it perfect the first out.
Yep. So do we have any objections to moving it to stage 2?
I have my hand up, and I'm not objecting as I'm an observer, and I don't think we should be able to, but I was wondering, as a member project, but not looking toward the impact yet, this list in here looks pretty daunting. And so from Express's side to ask, so one of the questions was, should existing projects be required to do this? I think if you're going to set these guidelines, every project should be required to. But I will say from my perspective, it will be a very long process if we do not have help to do this. and it looks pretty daunting. So it'd be one of those kind of things where going to the teams, especially if they're already, so one of the benefits that I see of if we were to participate more heavily here would be gaining resources. And this looks like a resource, like it looks like it's going to take a bunch of resources just to get fully involved. So I think, and I don't know if that blocks it from moving stages because I don't have a full understanding of what the stages mean yet. But I do think that should be considered before you go and evangelize this to the groups and the different projects.
I think that's a really good point, and part of why we were asking, like, should we run our existing projects through this? At some point, we do need to make sure that to your point, Wes, you know, all of the projects are on the same footing in terms of like policies and, you know, up to date on infrastructure and that kind of stuff that we're providing to new projects. We should, you know, that should all be, everybody should be on equal playing field. We had thought that perhaps taking our existing projects through the onboarding process would help us dog food it a bit and learn, you know, what we really need and how much this really takes. I will say that I, as a basically concierge for the OpenJS Foundation to a certain extent, I am here to help you with all of the items on that list. And, you know, I think that is something, and Brian Warner as well. I'm sorry, I'm volunteering Brian for more work than he already has, but we're here to help with this project. We don't imagine that anything that we ask the projects to do will necessarily be something they have to do on their own.
Also, yeah, that's good to hear. Because I think that, you know, definitely from our perspective, going through these things, I'm not even sure what some of them mean for us. And so we'll definitely need that support.
Yeah, I wonder if we should have some sort of pilot program with a couple of interested parties to kind of work through concerns and details of this process.
I would be delighted to work with, you know, someone a project who wants to volunteer to be first guinea pig.
Right. And I think we should likely expect our impact projects to lead the way on this.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea as well. How should we move forward on this?
So first, do we have +1 to stage 2?
I have no objections.
Likewise.
With the understanding that we're, you know, plan to work out all of these details as best we can.
Super duper. Okay, so I'll make sure that the comments and concerns on this PR are captured in the unresolved questions, that we refine this a bit and merge this. Yay, thank you guys, or everyone. Yeah. Sorry.
And I'll volunteer too to help with any sort of pilot program or working through, you know, fleshing out the details further on this.
Yeah, I think that makes sense because both the ComCom and the TSC are going to need to do a number of the activities. So it's probably having our CPC reps help champion that on the node side would be good.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Great. So moving on then, if there are no objections to moving on, it's we only have about 15 minutes. I'd like to get into PR 205, the doc clarifying guidance for landing PRs. And this is something we need to work out in particular because there was a few regular member PRs that were merged, and there was some kind of offline discussion that those would not be merged until the next meeting, but there was confusion. No, it's okay.
Yeah, sorry, I was wondering if I should have done that or not, but I apologize.
No worries, no worries. I think it's, you know, I think it's okay. We're working out these details, but I think that this is important. We clarify, you know, what's 72 hours and what needs to wait for a meeting. Let's see. So you opened this PR. Do you want to take us through it real quickly, Michael?
Sure. So basically, yeah, it adds in some clarification of when things will be landed. Sorry, I got to go back and find that one. 205. 205.
I dropped it
the wrong one.
Right.
Yep. So basically, it comes up with, and it's based on some of the discussion that we've had before, so that there's basically, if requests have been approved by 2 members, there's no objections, and 72 hours have passed, then an issue can land. That's the sort of baseline guidance. It says that pull requests that change governance of the CPC, in addition, need to have been open for at least 14 days, or consensus is reached in a meeting with quorum of the voting members. And the longer period is because, we want to make sure that anything related to governance, as many of the CPC members as possible can chime in and potentially object. And that's why it extends the time. But it's felt that, if we have a quorum of the meeting of the members, voting members in a meeting, that's also good enough to sort of make sure to say, well, yeah, we're comfortable that it's been looked at enough. There aren't any objections moving forward. And then finally, of course, if there's a pull request to change the charter, that requires approval of the board. And then it also clarifies at the end that if consensus cannot be reached, the pull request may still be landed after a vote by the voting CPC members to override outstanding objections.
Great. So that seems to clarify the issues we've been having. Does anyone disagree or have any other comments on this? Okay, great. I mean, this is important. Do we still have quorum here? I know a bunch of people have dropped off. Is this something we think we can move forward on?
I would. Nobody's objected, and there's quite a lot. I guess if this had landed, we would be okay, right?
Well, I'm noticing too, a couple of folks who dropped from the call and were voting members have +1 to the PR.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we may be able to say that we have quorum on this.
Yeah.
Between the comments on the pull request and the folks here, I feel like we probably made it.
Yeah, I think so too. Maybe that should be just commented on the PR before closing, before merging. All right, great. Thank you, Michael. So then if there are no objections, I will move on. The next issue in the list here is issue 199. This is approving charter changes for the Nodejs charter. This has been on the agenda for a couple of meetings. I think this is another issue where we've had trouble with quorum. Michael, do you want to give some context to this?
Sure. So basically, given that we've merged into the OpenJS Foundation, there's a number of things that we need to update to get our governance for the Nodejs project in line with being part of the foundation. So this goes through the Node TSC charter, and changes things like the Nodejs Foundation to OpenJS Foundation, and reflects that we're part of the foundation, which has a number of projects as opposed to a single foundation. Miles had taken it by the board and there was no objections there, but since the CPC is responsible, it's up to the CPC to do the final approval to be able to land that update to the governance. Now, I think based on the governance, it's called out specifically that the voting members need to approve that.
Yes, so looking at the issue itself, the CPC issue, I see, I think 5 voting members, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do we need like 8 voting members to have quorum for voting?
I guess it's, following the consensus seeking process, it would be provided that we believe enough of the CPC members, unless the charter specifically says there has to be a vote, it would be that, we're confident the CPC members have had enough time to review and that there's no objections, and that we have at least, some CPC members who have approved.
Okay. And does that previous pull request that clarifies some of these details, does it say 2 weeks as well?
Right. It says, I'm just trying to think, responsibilities. I'm just looking in the governance to see if there's anything very specific. Governance. Approving. Right, so the voting members are responsible for approving the charter and any updates for projects which are part of the OpenJS Foundation. As part of this review approval, the voting members will ensure the charter update is compatible with the mission of the OpenJS Foundation and reach consensus with the board on more substantial changes being filed before final approval by the CPC. So the other landing guidance says, okay, the change in governance of the CPC, but that's actually the CPC. So that doesn't clarify the process by which the CPC would approve those changes. That the voting members would approve those changes. I mean, I guess my first take would be that we use consensus seeking across the board. So as long as we've reached consensus among the CPC members, that's what's important. Maybe we could expand, have an entry that actually says how those need to be approved. Like specifically, like I could add to that other PR something that says, for when approving charters, and might do that in a follow-on PR if we've got agreement on the current one, but like that, changes to the charters or projects will, the PR needs to be open by 14 days if we think that's a reasonable time, and then have, at least 2 CPC voting member approvals and no objections.
I think that's a fair starting point to start the discussion, to have a follow-on PR for that.
So yeah, no, I think it would make sense to add that as, I'll add a new PR that adds that clarification, because the governance really just says the voting CPC members will need to reach consensus, but clarifying what that means is good.
Yep. All right, great. Yeah, because I think we should merge that other PR, and then if you can do a follow-on PR, that'd be fantastic.
Okay.
One thing I wanted to point out too, looking at that PR 205, I see that John Larkin does not maybe have write access to the repo, and he's a voting member, so we should fix that.
Hey, thanks.
Sure. All right, great. So let's see, where the heck are we? So then do we think that this issue 199 we can move on from and approve the Node.js charter? Any objections?
None here. I would love it if we do.
Yeah, me too. Michael, if you wouldn't mind dropping a comment in there, and then we can, what we discussed, and then we can move forward. That'd be fantastic. Yep. All right, great. Let's see. We have 6 minutes left. Start accepting nominations for regular members is the next issue 178. I see 7 days ago we're talking about adding something to governance. I think this is just clarity on capturing the process. So if someone wants to take that up, that would be great, and we can close this issue.
I think I missed that meeting, but
I was going to say, I think it'd be helpful for somebody to volunteer to take the task now of confirming that the open PRs for regular members are meet the criteria that we just agreed upon, and then cleaning up any merge conflicts, because at this point it's probably going to be a little messy.
They are, you can, through the UI, I mean, I did a few of them, as we mentioned. Through the UI, you can actually do that pretty easily when landing them.
I have to drop off myself now, but I didn't think there was anything else besides the +1 on the previous thing about to land.
Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Sean.
Yep,
Thank
no
you.
problem. Have a good one.
I see Timo has his hand up too.
Yeah, I'm not sure if this is in scope for this point in the meeting, but one of the wording around the definition of regular members was a little bit confusing to me. It says to have been a member of the project for 3 months. Does that mean to have commit access to the repository, or is there some other definition of being a member?
I think that depends on the project.
Yeah, it's a good question.
I think we intentionally left that a little vague, and maybe that will bite us. I'm not sure, but because I think we wanted to, encourage people who were, active in their specific project communities, and recognize that different projects organize their communities in different ways. So, I don't know if we have a really great answer for how to define who is in fact a member of a project, but there was this sort of like general thought that if we had a question about whether somebody was truly a member of a project, that we would ask that project's voting representative, or the person denoted with the foundation as the lead maintainer, if it looked questionable.
Okay, I guess that's good enough to start with. Yeah.
I mean, it can also be wrong and bad. I was just like, well, here's some spaghetti at this wall that we will throw.
So does that mean that if somebody were to nominate themselves, then by default we would accept them?
I think that's basically what we're saying, or that's basically how we've been thinking about proceeding.
Yeah, I think leaving it in that vague state would be fine. The only thing I would maybe want is that there's maybe some post-acceptance process to maybe notify the project lead that this has occurred, even if they weren't like required to react, that at least they have some way of finding out relatively easily. I don't know if that may be too much bureaucracy, but I'm just thinking for the QNet project in particular, a lot of us don't really have a significant amount of time dedicated to it. And this could be a source of stress if like people can nominate them, but we're not really sure what's happening on the other side of that. And that way we could maybe have the benefit of both, of it being both flexible and accepted by default, but also that at least you have maybe like an email somewhere or some notification like, this person is now a member for your project. I
think that it should be totally reasonable for us to also ask, and maybe the horse is out of the barn, so to speak, but I think it would be reasonable to ask regular members to PR their name, their GitHub, and like their project, because I don't think we're even asking that, like what project their community they're a part of. And maybe that's something we could add as a way to help us.
That definitely makes sense, as to say, well, which project are you joining for? I know we didn't do that. We probably should have, thinking about it.
Hindsight.
Yeah.
Is this going too far? Does it make sense that when you PR somebody in, that you tag someone from the project as sort of a sponsor or a voucher or something?
Well, I wouldn't want like that person to then not get, like PR'd in because say they tagged somebody, for example, maybe they're helping out with a project that like Hospital Run, for example, which is sort of large. They're very, they're not active in the CPC, but those maintainers are very busy. They may not respond to that for a while, and I would hate for them.
But it could be an objection. Like there's a CC. There's not mention unless there's somebody that stands up and says, "Oh, wait a second, no, this person isn't." Then you assume that you can go forward.
I think it's just a good way to notify just as long as there's a notification, right? I mean, I think if there were to be some weird situation where like somebody from the group wants to object and like they don't have a hierarchy or like really heavy governance that defines member, through election or nomination or whatnot, that you're at least getting a notification from, to someone in the project so that they could potentially do something about it if they had a concern, right?
Yeah.
I think the bare minimum without saying like you must have an you must approve. Because even if the person gets accepted and they maybe have an objection, that can be worked on, behind the scenes without causing some weird issue publicly. I don't know.
So what is your suggestion then, Tracy, in terms of?
I'm just agreeing with the notification to the project. Like
Okay.
just letting the project knowing that the person has been added as a member.
Okay.
So we would always leave a comment on the PR that like adds the project lead or something like that.
Yeah.
So I guess my question is, does it make sense to just do that at the beginning? Put the project lead and the opening of the PR.
Yeah, that probably makes sense.
Well, we're out of time, so I don't know how we want to wrap up this issue for today, at least.
I guess it still needs to be open until we have a volunteer and the process is captured. Is that?
Okay. Yeah.
I would love to help unblock this. I can't make any promises or commitments to getting this piece of work done before our next meeting. So that's why I'm not volunteering myself.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. I'll try to get to it, but I'm not sure all the time. So, if anybody gets time, take a peek at this issue and help us clarify it. I don't think it'll be too much work, so I'll try to get to it as well. Wes has his hand up before we wrap up.
Yeah, this is just ending. So if you had another topic to talk about before the end.
No, I didn't, but I did want to open the floor in case somebody wanted to make comments, observers or not.
Okay, well, I'm going to take this and some stuff from the project maintenance working group and present it to the Express Technical Committee this afternoon. I'd invite anybody to come. We don't have an observer role, but I think we probably should, so maybe I'll bring that up as well. But if anybody has any input and wants to attend, I'll post a link. Actually, let me grab the link right now. So that's at 4:30 this Pacific time, but this afternoon.
Okay, thank you for sharing. I'm interested. Any other comments before we wrap up? Great. Well, thanks everyone for participating. I see Wes dropped the link in the chat there for folks for the Express meeting later today. Yeah, thanks everyone for participating. It was a very productive meeting, and please check out some of these issues over the next week, and I will see you all next week. Thank you.
Later.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jory.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.